The weeks that followed proved Jonathan's decision hadn't been driven by emotion alone. It had been the right artistic choice. Every performance seemed to erase another layer of doubt. Instead of fading into the background as critics had predicted, Charlotte grew more confident with each appearance. Her theatrical warmth softened Jonathan's powerful operatic delivery, creating a contrast that audiences found impossible to forget. What had initially looked like two completely different singers now felt like two halves of the same performance. One brought breathtaking vocal power, the other brought heart. Together, they became something neither could have achieved alone. As they advanced through the competition, public opinion shifted dramatically. Viewers who had questioned whether Charlotte belonged beside Jonathan now defended the partnership just as fiercely as Jonathan himself had done on stage. Simon Cowell's controversial remark, intended as professional advice, had unintentionally united the audience behind the duo. Every new performance carried extra weight. People weren't just waiting to hear them sing. They were waiting to see whether they could continue proving everyone wrong. Their semi-final performance of Caruso became another defining moment. The emotionally demanding song required extraordinary control, but more importantly, it demanded complete trust between the singers. Jonathan delivered the soaring operatic passages with astonishing confidence, while Charlotte provided balance, restraint, and emotional texture. The performance ended to another standing ovation. Even Simon Cowell had to acknowledge what millions of viewers were already thinking. He admitted they had made the right decision by staying together. For Jonathan, it was quiet vindication. For Charlotte, it was something even more meaningful. She had spent weeks being viewed as the weaker half of the partnership, yet she had never publicly complained or tried to defend herself. Instead, she simply kept singing. Performance after performance, she allowed the music to answer every criticism. That quiet resilience won people over. By the time they reached the live final, Jonathan and Charlotte had become far more than contestants on a television talent show. They represented something audiences rarely get to witness in entertainment. A partnership built on mutual respect instead of ego. Returning to the prayer for the final felt almost poetic. It was the same song that had first brought them together years earlier at their teacher's wedding. Yet now they were performing it before millions of viewers across Britain. The difference was unmistakable. The nervous teenagers who had first stepped onto the BGT stage had disappeared. In their place stood two confident young performers who had survived public scrutiny, relentless media attention, and constant speculation about whether they belonged together at all. When the final note echoed through the theater, the applause seemed almost endless. David Walliams called the performance sensational. Simon Cowell described it as unbelievable. Although they ultimately finished in second place behind Ashley and Pudsey, defeat hardly mattered anymore. Their journey had become bigger than the competition itself. Almost overnight, Jonathan and Charlotte became household names. Record companies saw enormous potential in the pair, and Simon Cowell, who had once questioned whether they should remain together, offered them a recording contract through Psycho Music. It was an extraordinary twist. The very man who had suggested Jonathan pursue a solo career was now investing in the duo's future. Their debut album, Together, arrived only months after the show ended. Blending classical crossover, musical theater, and contemporary arrangements, it demonstrated that they were far more than reality television contestants enjoying 15 minutes of fame. The album climbed the UK charts, proving there was a genuine audience eager to follow them beyond Britain's Got Talent. Success came quickly. Television appearances, concert tours, interviews, awards ceremonies. For two teenagers barely old enough to understand the entertainment industry, life changed almost overnight. Yet fame also introduced pressures invisible to the public. Every interview returned to the same questions. Was Jonathan really carrying the duo? Would he eventually go solo? Were they secretly dating? The rumors became relentless. Some tabloids insisted there had to be romance between them simply because their onstage chemistry felt so authentic. Jonathan dismissed those stories completely, describing the speculation as uncomfortable and insisting Charlotte had always felt more like family than anything else. Their friendship remained genuine. But constant public attention has a way of changing even the strongest relationships. When millions of strangers begin defining your identity, it becomes difficult to remember who you were before the spotlight found you. Still, Jonathan and Charlotte continued moving forward. A second album, Perhaps Love, followed in 2013, showing subtle signs that each artist was beginning to discover a different creative voice. While they still performed beautifully together, careful listeners could already hear something changing beneath the harmonies. Jonathan seemed increasingly drawn toward traditional opera and grand classical arrangements. Charlotte found herself gravitating toward musical theater, storytelling, and contemporary stage performance. At first, those differences seemed small. After all, every musical partnership evolves. But over time, those artistic preferences stopped complementing one another. They began pulling in opposite directions. The public couldn't see it yet. The concerts continued. The albums sold well. The smiles during interviews remained genuine. From the outside, everything appeared exactly as it always had. Behind closed doors, however, a question neither of them had ever expected was quietly growing larger with every passing month. Not whether they still cared about each other, but whether caring about each other was enough to keep making the same music forever. Millions watched as Jonathan Antoine and Charlotte Giaconelli stepped onto the Britain's Got Talent stage in 2012. Within minutes, they had become more than contestants. They became symbols of loyalty, friendship, and the idea that genuine talent could still surprise the world. Even when one of television's most powerful judges suggested they should separate before their journey had truly begun, Jonathan refused without hesitation. His answer instantly became one of the show's most memorable moments, earning admiration from audiences who believed they had witnessed the beginning of a partnership that would last for decades. But that isn't what happened. A few years later, the duo quietly disappeared. No dramatic public feud, no explosive headlines, no shocking betrayal, just silence and two artists walking in different directions. So what really happened? Was Simon Cowell right all along? Did success slowly expose differences that had always existed beneath the applause? Or is the truth far more human than the rumors ever suggested? Because behind every standing ovation was a story most viewers never saw, a story about growing up under extraordinary pressure, navigating fame before adulthood, and learning that sometimes the hardest decisions aren't caused by conflict at all, but by change. Long before television cameras found them, Jonathan and Charlotte were simply two teenagers attending West Hatch High School in Essex. They shared a love of music, but surprisingly, they weren't close friends and had never imagined performing together. Their lives might have continued along completely separate paths, if not for one teacher who noticed something neither of them had yet discovered. Music teacher Jeanette Brown was preparing for her wedding and wanted two of her students to perform during the ceremony. Rather than choosing experienced duet partners, she paired Jonathan and Charlotte together for a performance of The Prayer, a song famous for demanding extraordinary control, emotion, and trust between two singers. It seemed like a simple decision. Instead, it changed both of their lives forever. As they rehearsed, something unexpected happened. Jonathan's powerful operatic tenor carried remarkable depth and maturity, while Charlotte's lighter theatrical voice added warmth and clarity. Individually, they were talented. Together, they created something neither had anticipated, a balance that made each singer stronger without overshadowing the other. By the time the wedding arrived, everyone in attendance sensed they were witnessing something unusually special. That single performance planted a seed neither teenager could ignore. Encouraged by their teachers and vocal coaches, they continued rehearsing together. What began as a one-time school performance slowly evolved into a genuine musical partnership built on trust rather than ambition. Before record labels, before television audiences, before newspaper headlines, there were simply two young performers discovering that their greatest strength wasn't competing against each other. It was listening to each other. Neither of them could have imagined how quickly that quiet partnership would be tested. In 2012, they walked onto the Britain's Got Talent stage, looking nothing like polished pop stars. Jonathan, shy and visibly nervous, had already spent years battling cruel comments about his appearance. Charlotte appeared more confident, offering quiet encouragement as they waited for the judges to speak. Then came the introduction that almost changed everything. Simon Cowell immediately focused on Jonathan. Before a single note had been sung, the atmosphere shifted. Viewers sensed the uncomfortable tension hanging over the stage. It was the kind of silence that makes every contestant wonder whether their dream is about to end before it has even begun. Then the music started. As the opening lines of the prayer echoed through the theater, every assumption disappeared. Jonathan's extraordinary voice stunned the audience into silence before applause erupted across the auditorium. Charlotte entered moments later, blending naturally with him in a way that transformed the performance from a showcase into a conversation. Neither voice dominated. Each lifted the other. By the final note, the audience was already on its feet. The judges looked genuinely astonished. For a few brief minutes, it felt as though everyone had witnessed the birth of Britain's next great classical crossover act. But then came the comment that would follow them for years. Simon Cowell praised Jonathan's remarkable talent before delivering a piece of advice that instantly divided the audience. Speaking directly to the young singer, he suggested that Jonathan might eventually need to leave Charlotte behind if he truly wanted to reach his full potential. It was the kind of remark only Simon Cowell could make, blunt, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore. Across Britain, viewers held their breath. Would a frightened 17-year-old choose personal success over loyalty? Jonathan didn't hesitate. With surprising calm, he rejected the idea completely. He wasn't interested in abandoning the person who had stood beside him from the beginning. Whatever happened next, they had entered the competition together, and together was how they intended to finish. It was a decision that instantly transformed public perception. Suddenly, audiences weren't simply rooting for two gifted singers. They were rooting for two friends whose loyalty seemed stronger than ambition itself. And as the competition continued, that loyalty would be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined.